Welcome to podcast episode number 488. We're getting pretty close to the magic 500 number. Today, I'm talking about scaling the ownership model in a secondary market with Rob Scarborough. He is the founder of Just Like Home Vacation Rentals. He's a recent graduate in the Legends X program. And we're excited to chat about this topic. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is my first podcast, and I am blown away that it's for the Get Paid for Your Pad podcast. This is big time.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Have you listened to some episodes in the past?
I think I'm somewhere around 380, trying to catch up. But yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, that's great to hear. I'm excited to have you on the show here. So there's two topics that we really want to talk about. Number one is the ownership model, and I'll give you a chance to give us a background of what you've built so far. But essentially, there's three models: there's the ownership, there's the master leasing, and there's the management model. So we're interested to learn more about why you chose this model. What are the pros and the cons? What are some challenges? And then also, being in a secondary market, right, is interesting as well. What are some pros and cons of that? So before we dive too deep, why don't you give us a quick backstory of how you got started in this business?
Sure. I have a full-time sales job that keeps me fairly busy, but it also allows me a lot of flexibility. So in 2014, 2015, I got into flipping homes and had a really successful run at that, small scale, because it was a part-time side hustle type thing. And in the end of 2017, I ran into an issue that a lot of flippers run into, and I had a contractor with about 2 weeks left on the job bail on me. And it kind of threw me off a little bit because we had 3 other homes lined up that I'd already paid him 50% down. And yes, I'm aware you should not prepay for labor the way I was doing. But this was a guy that we had done 6 or 8 successful flips and moving right on down the road. And I was contemplating doing that as a full-time job. So the end of 2017, he calls me up, says he's out of money, even though I'd already prepaid him 50% on 2 or 3 future homes, and he needed more. Said there was no more to give, so he left. Next contractor comes in, and maybe some of your listeners can relate, but when that new contractor comes in, the first thing they do is they point out all the things the last contractor did wrong. And they can't move forward unless they fix those things. So needless to say, that project went over budget. I ended up putting it on the market, and I had a real estate agent come in and tell me what we could sell it for is actually going to make a little profit. I was blown away. Set on the market for 3 months in a hot market that nothing was sitting on the market for 3 months, kept lowering the price. And I just happened to hear a podcast, Bigger Pockets podcast on short-term rentals. And I thought, well, I can take a loss on this, or I can try something new. And so I am an accidental Airbnb short-term rental host. It went live on Airbnb in January of 2018. And within 6 months, I was hooked. And at the time, I had a couple different partners that were I was using their money to fund flips, their money along with hard money or small local banks for construction loans, but it was a combination. And within about 6 months, all 3 of the partners were like, why are we doing flips? The taxes are obscene. Let's hold on to these and build wealth. And I was 100% on board. So by summer of 2018, we devoted all of our efforts to building a short-term rental business. And we didn't have huge growth. We still don't have huge growth. We're adding 2 to 3 properties, 2 to 5 properties a year. partially because I love my full-time job. And if my boss ever hears the podcast, I love my job. But this is definitely interesting, being able to build and scale, especially with the tools that Legends X gave us, to my wife and I, to really grow this beyond what we thought we could. So that's kind of how we got into it. Right now, we're managing 15 properties. We have ownership in 12 of those. We have 4 more properties coming online where we're in the process of furnishing them. And we have ownership in 3 of those. So ownership is still a big part of our management of our business profile. But late last year, I decided it was time to try to monetize some of my experience. And that's why we opened it up to managing other people's properties.
Yeah. Yeah, as so many of us, you got into it by accident. I'd say like 90% of the people I speak with. So I guess for you, it was kind of a natural flow to go into the ownership model because you were already buying these homes. So I guess it wasn't really like a conscious decision of like, hey, I want to get into Airbnb. Which model should I choose? It was just a natural process for you. I'm curious to understand like your decision. You're now also open to management. So you recognize like, hey, through building this business, I've gained skills, I've gained knowledge, and I could be using that, to monetize by managing other people's properties, right? How's that experience so far?
It's been good. Obviously, there's a learning curve to any new skill, and managing other people's properties is absolutely a skill that I'm still learning. I will say that the Legends X program gave me the confidence. I actually parted ways with my first owner. He was a very good guy. We're still on good terms, but a lot of his processes that he wanted in place were very one-off from my flow of business. And it got to the point where we just had a good conversation and said, look, if we're not able to line things up with my business structure, then you're probably best managing this on your own. And I never would have had that confidence without going through that program and learning how important those processes and structure is to being able to scale.
Yeah, because I guess that's one of the biggest differences between the ownership and management is now you're dealing with other owners, right? Would you say that's the biggest challenge when it comes to the management side?
Absolutely. When our properties have an issue, I'm able to pick up the phone and call the plumber, call the electrician, call the HVAC guy. And now I'm calling an owner, letting them know they have an issue and it needs corrected as soon as possible, because we either have guests in the home or guests are arriving tomorrow afternoon, but whatever the case. And relying on someone else to get stuff done is an interesting challenge.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so we already touched on one of the big advantages of the ownership model is that you don't have to deal with anybody. You own the asset. What are some other advantages or things that you really enjoy when it comes to this model?
So on the ownership side, coming from somewhat of a real estate background in the flips that I was doing before, I mean, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, pick your real estate book. Long-term wealth is gained through ownership. That's why the arbitrage model never really made sense to me. If I'm going to invest the money, I would much rather own that asset, control it, and then get all of the perks of ownership, paying down the mortgage and the tax benefits and everything that goes along with owning a home, an investment property. So yeah, that's probably the biggest advantage in my opinion.
Are there any cons, any disadvantages that you can think of?
Absolutely. As the owner or partial owner in 12 properties, keeping up with the maintenance, we're 3.5, 4 years in on several of these properties, and some of that maintenance, like it's time to do something. It's time to retile a bathroom. It's time to whatever that maintenance fix is. And when it was just 1 or 2 properties, I can just run over there in between sales calls and knock it out, no big deal. But I don't have the capacity to do that anymore. So growing that subcontractor handyman network is huge right now for where I'm at in the business. The hectic host is 100% where I'm at right now.
And what are like the best ways to find these people, especially because you're in a smaller market, right?
Well, we are in a smaller market, but we're Kansas City as a whole is a fairly large market. There's contractors. You can't shake a stick without finding a contractor, finding a good contractor, one that's going to stick around, one that's going to do what they say they're going to do. That's a lot of trial and error, a lot of asking other people in the industry, keeping a network of other real estate investors. And hey, who are you using for this? And would you recommend them? That's where my best contacts have been made.
Yeah, that makes sense. If someone's listening right now, thinking like, hey, this all makes sense, owning the asset, especially with, inflation is kind of out of control now. So that's a focus for a lot of people, is owning these assets. Like if you had to start over again, what would be like 3 things you would have done different, or 3 pieces of advice that you would give somebody new?
If I were to start over again, wow. I would say be open and flexible to new ideas. I am a terrible goal setter. The pillar in the Legends X, that was my most difficult pillar, was setting goals, because in my mind, if I would have set the goals of I want to flip 10 homes a year, maybe I wouldn't have been open to the idea of trying short-term rentals. I would have sold it for a loss, moved on to the next, and that would have been it. And this whole new chapter of my life possibly never would have been opened. So be open and flexible, be ready to pivot. And well, so we'll stick to the 3 tips for now, but I do want to get to that smaller secondary market and pivoting, because through COVID, we learned a lot of valuable information for our business model. I think if you're using other people's money, friends, family, acquaintances, talk about what you're doing, talk about what your goals are, and you'll be surprised how many people, especially now, have cash sitting on the sideline, and short-term rentals is the new hot, sexy thing that everyone wants to be in. And really all 3 of my partners, they want to be in short-term rentals, but 2 of them at least haven't visited the majority of our properties. They can say that they're doing Airbnb, but they're silent partners because they have this cash. They're busy doing their own thing, and the skills that we've learned allows us to use that money. But if you're going to use other people's money, you have to be extremely transparent. Be willing to take a loss on your end to keep their money, their investment intact. At least that's my business model. That's how I treat my partners. And because I have the full-time job, I think it allows me to take a loss on real estate. If I make a mistake or something bad happens, I'm able to, it's not putting food on my table at this point, not yet anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
So the third tip, if you're going to partner up and get into the ownership, treat the management side as a separate company from the beginning. For all three of my partners, because of the way our businesses evolved, I've had to go back to them and say, look, my management side is taking off. The flat rate that I was charging early on and running over as a handyman and fixing things here and there, that's not sustainable. And now we have to renegotiate or at least be open to changing some of the terms of how the property management side of our company works, which is separate from the ownership side. And if you're just starting out, keep that in mind. It's two completely separate businesses that just happen to be in the same industry.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. That's how Eric and I set it up for our new business as well. And even if you're not planning to manage other people's properties, it's still best to have those two separate companies, right? Because they're two different businesses, as you mentioned, and it just saves a lot of headaches in the future. So that's really important, to set up your business the right way in the beginning, because that's just gonna, like I said, save you so much problems. So just to recap, your tips were number one, be flexible. Right. I think that's great advice, especially when in the early phases of any business. I would say we have to always be ready to pivot, because a lot of times when people start a business, what they end up doing is actually different from what they started out with. Right. I mean, look at Airbnb itself. Right. They were renting. Their plan was to rent out airbeds. Right. It's a little different now.
Yeah.
So that's good. Number two is be really transparent with your investors. Like, I like that approach, because it's basically focusing on the long term, right? It's like, what's that expression? Like, you can lose a battle, but you want to win the war, right?
Yeah.
If you have to take a small, take a cut or something, but keep the trust and relationship with your investors. I think that's a smart strategy. And then number three is what was number three? I forgot number three now.
Number three is operate the management side as a separate business from the ownership.
Yeah. Awesome, man. That's really good advice. Let's talk a little bit more about, I guess, one of the biggest challenges with ownership, obviously, is like it's a bit harder to scale fast, right? I mean, this is the reason that rental arbitrage is so popular. Not so much anymore, because now through COVID, people have seen like what the risk is there. But obviously, it's much easier to sign a couple of new leases than to purchase a few more assets, right? And especially because of the financing too, right? You have to, find the money and make the deal with the investors. What do you think for somebody who wants to start out? What's their best approach to finding partners to invest with?
So if you're talking about actual investors that are going to put money into the deal, talk about what you're doing. One of my partners is in the same industry that I am for my full-time W-2 job. We were on a business trip together, and I was telling him about, what we were doing or what the plans were for flipping homes. And, this is a guy that I had maybe 3 conversations with total in my life. And we were just having some drinks, on a business trip. And he's like, well, I have a little money that's not working for me. If you come across a deal, talk to me. And literally, if I would have never said what I was doing in real estate, that whole partnership never would have come about. So just tell people what your goals are, what your vision is, what you're interested in doing. And you just never know who has that 10, 20, 30 grand sitting in an account not working for them, or maybe earning negative interest. It's crazy what banks are doing. But so that's on the partnership side, the investor side. But also go talk to your small local community banks. It's amazing some of the programs that they have, that the Wells Fargos or that the big national, international banks, they want nothing to do with small guys like us. Mm-hmm. What those small local banks, for example, one in our community, on any type of rehab project, you put up 20% of the purchase price, whatever that purchase price is. And I've bought a home for 5,000 before that needed 100 grand in renovations. And I put up 20% of the purchase price, and they financed 80% of the purchase price plus 100% of the rehab, up to 80% of what that home is going to be worth when we're finished with it. So for literally a few $1,000s, we purchased a home that on the backside was worth 150, 160,000 a couple of years ago. So go in and talk to those local bankers. The first conversation I had, I walked into what I found out was the bank vice president's office. And he said, well, what are you looking for? And I said, well, how about a $500,000 line of credit? Open-ended, no questions asked. And he kind of chuckled and said, well, I don't think I can do that. But, and that relationship with that bank has grown. And now one of my partners is an employee of that bank, and she's fantastic. She has her ears to the ground on the bank's perspective of real estate and rehabs and multifamily apartment buildings going up. It's amazing the amount of information that she brings to our partnership. So you've got the other people's money, the partners, and then I consider our local banks partners as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You know, that's that's something we were just out in Mexico on our STR Legends Mastermind. And that's something that I hear a lot from people that work on bigger scale with banks, is that relationship with the banker is really important. Actually, one person mentioned, like, there's only one person who, when I get a call from that person, he wants to hang out, it's my banker. It's the only person that no matter what, I'll say yes.
Yeah, absolutely. They, at the end of the day, they have your best interest in mind as well. I've had bankers tell me that this is not a good deal, and I've stayed away from it. I kept tabs on it, and the next investor did not fare so well on that project because he had a hard money lender or someone who was just giving him money without really underwriting that deal for everyone's best interest, so that they can save you a lot of money too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm really seeing them, I guess, as a partner versus a bank, right? And so what I'm getting from what you're saying is, number one, it's everything is about people. Everything is about relationship with people, right? And then number two is, you know, I think a lot of people who want to get into owning real estate, in their mind, it's like, oh, I need to find an investor, which is like, you know, this big company or this you know, person who has like millions and millions of dollars. Versus, like you said, if you just look in your personal network, right? That's how Eric and I found our first investor too. Is just like literally just talking to all of our friends and everybody that we know, without pushing, right? Without saying like, hey man, like I got this deal, like you want to invest? No, just saying like, hey, this is what we're building, and you know, without asking anything. And then eventually, it's, you know, you get that interest of like, hey, what's happening on your end? Like, you guys investing in anything? Or, you know, they'll start warming up to the idea, and then like they'll come to you, right? So at least that's been our experience so far.
Yeah, that was our experience as well.
Yeah, awesome. Before we wrap this up here, let's talk quickly about your market. You're in Kansas City. You know, how many people live there? Just to get an idea.
So Kansas City proper, probably a few million, but the suburbs that surround it, I should probably know this. We're a lot bigger than you think. I'll throw a number out of like 10 million total in all of the surrounding suburbs that consider Kansas City. If you're talking to someone on a plane and they say they're from Kansas City, you know, that would include all of those suburbs and surrounding communities.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're not far off. Just Google it. Metropolitan area, 2.4 million. So that's a lot of people. in my mind, I was thinking, it's maybe 600,000, 700,000. So that's as you mentioned, that's actually like a pretty big market, but it's not, it's not like a famous like city like Los Angeles or New York or something like that, right? So
Now you're offending Chiefs fans worldwide right now by saying it's
uh-oh.
not.
All right, well, I'll lock my door tonight. Yes. But tell us a little bit about like how is it? What is it like being in that market?
Yeah, so just like any large or medium sized city, there's rough neighborhoods, there's good neighborhoods, there's high end neighborhoods, and we tend to focus on all of our homes are what I would consider your first time home buyer type properties. Our business model, I was in the mortgage industry from 2000 to 2005, but was watching what happened in 07, 08. And interestingly enough, in Kansas City, during the worst real estate crash in maybe our lifetime, or at least since the Great Depression, the first time home buyer homes barely slowed down. They were still being bought and sold. So as a risk tolerance for myself and my partners, we really like that first time home buyer price range. Now that number has skyrocketed from, we might have been able to buy and rehab a home and be all in for $75,000. And that's another thing. We like to buy the rehabs to force appreciation. It's rare, although we've had to do it recently, that we ever buy retail, because it's just not our normal business model. We like to buy the fixer uppers. We're into it for 80% of what it's worth when we're done, and then we can let the markets fall and come back up. We don't have huge appreciation. We don't have huge drops in our market either. So that first time home buyer market allows us to feel comfortable about our assets.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the most we've ever spent on a home was probably a retail project that we just, or home that we just purchased. It's completely rehabbed already, and we just spent $225,000 on it.
Mm-hmm.
That's at the edge of our comfort level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, I mean, you can probably get a small little closet for that money in New York.
So what's interesting to me, and what I realized, I guess that the clarity came is in our pod, we had people from San Diego and Joshua Tree, and obviously those markets are a lot more expensive than ours. And I think the way that those hosts were differentiating themselves were with a luxury style. I think both of them had some sort of luxe in their name, their actual branding name. And because we're in the first, we're in the price point that we don't have big murals, a hashtag Instagram mural on any of our walls. We don't have a Star Wars themed home. It's the name of our business is just like home, and our guest avatar is a lot like my wife and I. We're not going to spend $1,000 a night to stay in an Instagram worthy place, even when we vacation, because for us, the home is just where we sleep and maybe we cook a little bit, but we're there to see the city or whatever that attraction is that brought us to that part of the country or that part of the world. So that's how my hosting personality is. So what we learned through COVID is that a lot of our counterparts that have those big, beautiful, expensive homes, they really got hurt during COVID. Because those travelers were not traveling as much, if at all. For us, because of our price point, we still had construction workers coming to town. We absolutely love construction workers coming to town because they're in our homes for 3 weeks or 3 months at a time. and they get up at 7 a.m. They don't get back to the home until 7 or 8 p.m. and they shower, go to bed, and do it again the next day.
Mm-hmm.
The maintenance, we don't hear complaints out of the construction worker because they just want a comfortable bed and maybe a place to cook a meal with the guys. So for us during COVID 2020, by the end of the year, we were only down 10% revenue year over year. And I know other hosts that were down 75%. So for us, that solidified our business model and where our risk tolerance is.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. I remember in 2008, I was actually working in Chicago as in finance. And I remember, well, first of all, like I was trading through the crash. So it was pretty interesting times. But also I remember like the real estate in some of these places, like Miami, for example, it was crazy. I remember there was brokers from Miami that like literally came down to our office to recruit us to come over to Miami and take a look at some of these condos because they were so desperate to sell these things, you know, which to me was like kind of crazy. Awesome, Rob. Thank you so much for sharing your advice. I think this was awesome. Thanks for taking our course as well. You mentioned a couple of things that you learned in Legends X, and we are actually doing a workshop, which is going to go live next week. You can already sign. Everybody who's listening right now, you can already sign up for it. overnightsuccess.io/workshop. And the idea behind the workshop is actually to give everybody an opportunity to kind of get a taste for what it's like to be in Legends X. You mentioned like guest avatar, like creating the vision pillar, right? Was the hardest part for you. That's actually what we're going to be focusing on the workshop. We've taken a few of those smaller pieces, and in 2 hours, we're going to actually help everybody on the workshop to dial in some of these steps. And as a result, just like you said, like it just gives you a little more confidence of understanding, you know, how to make decisions when you understand like what do you actually want to build, like who you're serving, and all the good stuff. So for everybody out there who's listening, overnightsuccess.io/workshop. It's about 2 hours. You'll be working directly with us, and yeah, it's free. So good opportunity to learn. So Rob, thank you so much, man, and good luck with everything. Let's stay in touch, and yeah, that's it. Any final thoughts?
I don't think so. I think the next few years in the short-term rental industry is going to be really interesting, especially for my market. There's every real estate meetup, everyone's talking short-term rentals. So it'll be interesting to see what market saturation looks like in a secondary market like ours.
Mm-hmm. Got it. If people are listening right now and they want to stay in Kansas City or potentially work with you in the future, what's the best way to contact you?
Email is the best way. And my email is rob@justlikehomevr.com.
rob@justlikeHomeVR.com. Awesome. Sounds great. All right, Rob. Well, thank you so much. And to the listeners, thank you for listening. And of course, we'll be back on Friday with another episode. Have a great week.
Thanks, Jasper.